The play opens literally in the middle of the action, in media res. While some critics may argue that the disruption to the natural order is brought about by the love trial, an inspection of the base and bawdy language used as the Earl of Gloucester introduces his illegitimate son Edmund to the Earl of Kent tells us that this kingdom has already begun its descent into chaos. For Jacobean audiences especially, joking about infidelity would have indicated that this version of England is already fractured, and that following good sense and manners has gone out of the window. We see that Gloucester tells Kent that his older legitimate son Edgar is no dearer in my account than Edmund, and that he loves them both. While all audiences, especially modern ones, would see this as the right thing for a father to do, those in the know about Jacobean custom and lines of descent would see this as further evidence that something has gone very wrong in this kingdom. The setting is clearly established, as is the mood and tone. Still in scene 1, King Lear announces his plan to divide his kingdom into 3 and give equal parts of it to each of his 3 daughters and their husbands to rule over. Before they can have their part of the kingdom, he demands his daughters publicly declare how much they love him. While audiences would suspect that parts of his behaviour were appropriate, as there were many rules associated with courtly custom, the notion that Lear's darker purpose, to divide the kingdom, was premature and predetermined wouldn't sit well with audiences who had just endured a significant unrest in their own world. Even modern audiences sense that something is not right when financial diction is used to measure love, and when each child must put on a show. We see the younger daughter Cordelia refuse to make a glib and oily speech like her sisters. Lear is so angry he disowns her and gives her portion of the kingdom to her sisters' husbands, Albany and Cornwall. The Earl of Kent steps up to defend Cordelia and tries to tell Lear that thy youngest daughter does not love thee least. But Lear grows angry with Kent too and banishes him from the kingdom on pain of death. We're positioned to see that Kent is a good person and that his heart and morals were in the right place. Not only does he fulfill his duty as an advisor, but he protects someone we have seen wronged, inviting us to take up the position that his loyalty is better than Lear's or anyone else's. After Kent's banishment, we return to Cordelia's. Cordelia had 2 suitors at the court who hoped to marry her. Hearing she has been disowned and has lost the portion of the land that would have been her dowry, one of them, Burgundy, decides that he didn't want to marry her anymore. But the King of France says she is herself a dower, and takes her to France with him. France is an unusual choice given the decades of animosity between England and France at the time of writing. But this works in the plot as it further highlights Lear's cruelty, and later on we see Cordelia's unwavering loyalty to her father, as she explains that she left the King of France at home because her return to England is not for political gain, but instead to save her father. The final part of this opening scene pertains to the 2 eldest daughters who speak about their plot to turn against their father. While they indicate that he has only slenderly ever known himself, evidence for many critics that Lear may always have been a slightly useless and detached king, the loyalty shown by Kent and the longevity of Lear's sovereign authority up to this point suggests otherwise. Despite these varied arguments, we can see that all the evidence certainly adds up to say that chaos and disharmony has been allowed to fester, meaning that all those good traits like loyalty, sovereign control, good parenting, moral behaviour and respect, amongst other things, have gone out the window. Let's go to scene 2. In a soliloquy, Edmund confides in the audience that he feels it is unfair to be treated differently from his brother just because his mother was not married to Gloucester, and because he is younger than Edgar. Edmund is determined to change things and very easily fools his father into believing that Edgar is plotting against him. Gloucester calls Edgar abhorred villain, unnatural, detested, brutish villain, worse than brutish. The irony of proclaiming that his good son is traitorous while his truly traitorous son stands in front of him is not lost on audiences. The dramatic irony employed through the soliloquies throughout the play adds to this. Not happy with just tricking his father, Edmund convinces Edgar that their father is angry with him, but that he will try to help. Edmund confides in the audience that if he cannot inherit Gloucester's wealth by birth, he will have lands by wit. Let's go to scene 3, where more dramatic irony is employed. Goneril confides in her servant Oswald that she is fed up with her father's behaviour while he is staying in her house and complains that his knights grow riotous. She tells Oswald not to show respect to Lear and his followers. We know that she is the orchestrator of this disrespect, but we also know that she will not admit to it in public yet, and that Lear is in for a surprise given that he thinks he's gotten away with his premature and partial surrendering of power. Again, we cannot ignore the tumultuous and upside-down nature of Lear's England when children attempt to usurp fathers and servants disrespect the king. On to scene 4, where things start to come to a head and Lear's power is unravelled, as is his mind. To begin, Kent disguises himself and goes to King Lear. He promises to serve him truly, and Lear agrees to take him on. Kent shows his loyalty, again, by punishing Oswald for disrespecting the king. While Kent does aim to warn Oswald, which redeems him a little, the act of tripping and hitting Oswald and the knock-on effects certainly begin to indicate to audiences that Kent is loyal to a fault. Lear asks where his fool is, having not seen him these 2 days. The suggestion that the fool has been missing could certainly act as evidence that the fool is a physical embodiment of Lear's conscience, as well as Lear's goodness. This certainly lines up when we think about how loyal the fool is to Lear, how Lear does show loyalty back, and that without his conscience and good common sense, Lear has foolishly given up his kingdom and his best daughter. When the fool arrives, he makes witty remarks and sings songs suggesting that Lear is now the fool for giving away all his other titles. The fool tells Lear, "Thou madest thy daughters thy mother," by retiring and handing power to them and their husbands. Not only does this comment reinforce that Lear's actions are unnatural, but it also begins to set up the representation of gender that runs through the play. A modern audience may perceive this play as sexist and read into the violent expression of femininity as misogynistic. However, to take a reading like this would be anachronistic for the Jacobean era. What could be argued instead is that gender is used intentionally to heighten Lear's unnatural decisions and struggle with the loss of power to his daughters. The emasculation that is suggested here and throughout the play also helps to illustrate the folly of choosing personal desires over loyalty and responsibility. This scene is where we also see again one of the most present themes of the play: nothing. Clever wordplay is used to reinforce the paradox of nothing and highlights Lear's folly in desiring personal or selfish things over his role as sovereign. As the fool declares, "Then 'tis like the breath of an unfeed lawyer, you give me nothing for it. Can you make no use of nothing, uncle?" And Lear replies, "Why no, boy, nothing can be made of nothing." And then the fool delivers some very clear criticism of Lear. Then Goneril enters in a moment of comedy, again with clever wordplay through homophones, after the fool declares her one of the pairings that has torn Lear apart. She complains to her father that his 100 knights and squires are men so disordered, so debauched and bold, that they have made her court more like a tavern or a brothel than a graced palace. Lear is furious with her, despite her clearly being right as the whole party enters raucously. Lear curses her and commands his followers to leave immediately and go to his daughter Regan instead. Goneril sends word to Regan by letter, another device used to show truth and deception, appearance and reality, and the difference between speech and action throughout the play. Again, dramatic irony is employed in this scene to let audiences understand and criticise Lear's blind trust, folly, and senselessness. Which brings us to scene 5. After sending Kent as his messenger to Regan, Lear talks with his fool while he waits for his horses to be ready to leave Goneril's house. The fool tells him, "Thou shouldst not have been old till thou hadst been wise," and Lear pleads, "Oh, let me not be mad, not mad, sweet heaven." There's a moment here that lets us see perhaps Lear has some insight, but his pride and vanity, his hamasha, continue to overwhelm him and he proceeds. We know he's walking into a trap, and that the world of the play is only descending further into chaos as the sovereign authority ignores what's going on right under his nose. This brings us to the end of Act 1.